A chubby taxi driver slapped a mafia boss in a parking lot because he crashed her cab and walked away like it was nothing. The whole city saw it, but what came after that, nobody could have predicted. The morning Emma Parker backed her cab into the cemetery parking lot, she was already 40 minutes behind and running on 3 hours of sleep and a gas station coffee that had gone cold somewhere around the Callahan tunnel. She cut the engine, checked her phone for the next fare request, and let out a long breath. The pickup wasn't for another 8 minutes. 8 minutes was enough time to close her eyes, just for a second, and pretend the transmission hadn't been making that grinding sound again. Pretend the rent wasn't due Friday. Pretend her mother's physical therapy bills hadn't doubled last month. She didn't close her eyes. Instead, she pulled out the worn notebook she kept in the center console and ran her finger down the column of numbers she'd been tracking for weeks. Income, expenses, the gap between them that never seemed to close no matter how many double shifts she pulled. Emma drove 12 to 14 hours most days. She ate in the car. She skipped doctor's appointments because the copay alone would wipe out a morning's earnings. She had done everything right, every practical, unglamorous thing a person was supposed to do, and still the numbers didn't balance. She snapped the notebook shut. That was when the black SUV hit her. It wasn't a dramatic crash, no shattering glass, no Hollywood explosion, just a solid, sickening crunch of metal on metal as the luxury vehicle reversed out of the adjacent space without warning and drove straight into her passenger side door. The impact rocked Emma sideways in her seat, sending the cold coffee tumbling off the dashboard and into her lap. For a moment she just sat there, staring at the ceiling. Then she got out. The SUV was enormous, matte black, the kind of vehicle that cost more than Emma made in 2 years. The driver's door opened and a man stepped out who looked like he'd been dressed by someone paid specifically to make him look important. Dark coat, clean shoes, sharp jaw. He was maybe 40, with the kind of controlled expression that said he hadn't been genuinely surprised by anything in a long time. He looked at Emma's cab. Then he looked at Emma. "You were parked too close to the line," he said. Emma blinked. "Excuse me? Your vehicle was over the line." He said it like he was explaining something to someone slow. "You made it difficult to exit the space." Emma walked around to the passenger side and stared at the damage. The door panel was caved in. The side mirror was hanging by a wire. She pressed her fingers against the dent, feeling the cold metal, and something in her chest went very tight. "This is going to cost me at least $800, she said quietly. "File it with your insurance. My deductible is $1,000. She turned to face him. "I can't afford this." He was already pulling out his phone, unbothered. "I don't have time for this today." And that was the sentence that did it. Not the crash, not the damage, not even the dismissal. It was the casual certainty in his voice, the absolute confidence that his time was worth more than her livelihood, that his inconvenience mattered, and hers simply didn't. Emma had been absorbing that message from the world for years, quietly, professionally, with a tight smile and a "thank you, have a good day." She slapped him. It wasn't planned. Her hand moved before her brain finished the thought, a sharp, clean crack across his left cheek that echoed off the cemetery fence and startled a group of pigeons from a nearby oak tree. The man's head turned with the impact. His phone dropped. The silence that followed was the loudest thing Emma had ever heard. She became aware, slowly, of other sounds. A car door opening somewhere behind her, the faint sound of wind through headstones, and something closer, the soft chime of a phone notification, then another, then several more in quick succession. She turned. A woman near the cemetery entrance had her phone raised. 2 teenagers near the gate. An older man by the flower stand at the corner. Everyone was recording. Emma looked back at the man. He had straightened up. His cheek was red. His expression had shifted into something she couldn't read. Not quite anger, not quite shock. Something in between, or maybe something entirely different from both. "Do you know who I am?" he said. His voice was low and even. "You're the person who hit my car," Emma said. He stared at her for a long moment. Then he bent down, picked up his phone and slid it into his coat pocket. He looked at her cab one more time. Then he got back in the SUV and drove away. Emma stood in the parking lot until the sound of the engine faded. Her hand was still tingling. Her heart was slamming against her ribs. She looked down at herself, at the coffee stains spreading across her uniform, at the worn soles of her shoes, at her hands that spent 12 hours a day wrapped around a steering wheel. Then she got back in the cab. Her phone buzzed. A new fare request 2 miles away. She accepted it, pulled out of the lot and drove. By the time she reached the pickup address, she had 47 new notifications. By the time she dropped the fare off, the video had been viewed 11,000 times. By midnight, Ryan Carter's name was trending across every local news feed in Boston, and Emma Parker, the taxi driver who'd slapped him, had become the person everyone in the city was talking about. Emma didn't see any of it. She was already asleep, sitting upright in her parked cab outside her apartment building, the notebook open in her lap, the numbers still not balancing. The video had a life of its own by Tuesday morning. Emma found out just how far it had spread when her first fare of the day, a retired school teacher named Gloria, climbed into the back seat, squinted at Emma's face in the rearview mirror, and said, "You're the taxi lady, aren't you? The one who smacked that rich fellow at the cemetery?" Emma kept her eyes on the road. "I'd rather not talk about it." Gloria talked about it anyway, all the way to her doctor's appointment on Commonwealth Avenue. She thought Emma was brave. She thought rich people needed to be put in their place more often. She tipped $20 on a $9 fare and told Emma to keep her chin up. 3 other passengers brought it up before noon. The attention made Emma uncomfortable in a way she couldn't quite explain. She hadn't done something heroic. She'd lost her temper in a parking lot, and now a stranger's face was attached to the worst moment of her week. She kept waiting for the other shoe to drop, for a lawsuit notice, for a police visit, for something official and expensive to arrive at her door. What arrived instead on Wednesday afternoon was a phone call from a number she didn't recognize. She almost didn't answer. She was parked outside a coffee shop in Back Bay, eating a sandwich over the steering wheel, and the last thing she wanted was another reporter asking how it felt to stand up to power. She answered anyway. "Miss Parker." The voice was calm, measured, and immediately familiar in the worst possible way. "This is Ryan Carter." Emma put down her sandwich. "I'm not calling to threaten you," he said before she could speak. "I want to meet in person. There's something I'd like to take care of." She almost said no. The word was right there, ready. But something in his tone stopped her, some quality she hadn't expected. He didn't sound angry. He didn't sound like a man preparing to make her life difficult. He sounded tired. They met the following morning at a small cafe on Newbury Street, the kind of place with mismatched chairs and coffee that actually stayed hot. Emma arrived 10 minutes early and chose a table near the window so she could see the door. Old habit. Ryan walked in exactly on time, without the coat this time, in a plain dark sweater that made him look considerably less intimidating than he had in the cemetery parking lot. He sat down across from her and slid an envelope across the table without preamble. "For the repairs," he said. Emma looked at the envelope but didn't touch it. "How much is in there?" $1,500, in case the estimate runs high. She picked it up, turned it over once, and set it back down. "You could have mailed this." "I could have," he agreed. He ordered a black coffee. She ordered nothing because she'd already had 2, and her hands were jumpy enough. For a moment, neither of them said anything, which was somehow less awkward than it should have been. "The parking lot," Emma said finally. "By the cemetery. Do you go there often?" Something shifted in his face. Not much, just a small adjustment around the eyes. "Every year, same week." She didn't push. But he continued anyway, looking at his coffee cup rather than at her. "My wife," he said. "She passed 4 years ago. It was sudden." He paused. "I still don't entirely know what to do with that week every year." So I drive there in the morning and sit for a while and then go back to work. It probably sounds strange. It doesn't, Emma said, and she meant it, because grief was one of the things she understood without needing it, explained. Her father had died when she was 19, and she still drove past his old barbershop on Washington Street sometimes, not stopping, just driving past, because some losses don't become smaller, they just become familiar. Ryan looked up at her. You didn't flinch when you slapped me. I was angrier than I was scared, she said honestly. A short laugh escaped him, so brief and unguarded that it seemed to surprise him as much as it surprised her. It changed his face completely, made him look like someone different, someone who laughed more easily once. The car repairs, Emma said, nodding toward the envelope. Thank you. I mean that. It was my fault, he said simply. I was distracted and I reversed without checking. And then I was rude to you, which was worse. He wrapped both hands around his cup. I'm not usually… He stopped, tried again. That week is hard. I don't manage it well. Emma nodded. She understood managing grief badly. She understood showing up to your life anyway, hollow and functioning, because the bills still came regardless of how you felt inside. They sat for another 20 minutes, talking in the careful way two strangers do when they've already seen each other at their worst and are trying to establish something more neutral. Ryan asked about her work. Emma told him about the double shifts, the rising fuel costs, her mother's therapy schedule. She didn't complain, just stated facts the way she always did, because facts were manageable and self-pity was not. He listened without interrupting, which she noted. When they stood to leave, he held the door open and she walked through it onto Newbury Street, where the morning had turned unexpectedly warm for October. Miss Parker, he said from behind her. She turned. If you ever need anything, he said, and then seemed uncertain how to finish the sentence. He left it there, unfinished, hanging between them in the autumn air. Emma pocketed the envelope, gave him a single nod, and walked back to her cab. She thought about that unfinished sentence for the rest of the day. The fare request came in at 6:47 in the evening. Cambridge pickup destination listed as South Boston. 40-minute drive, maybe longer with evening traffic. Emma accepted it without thinking much, pulled onto Memorial Drive, and found the address. A quiet residential street lined with oak trees that had gone fully gold in the October cold. The passenger was already waiting on the sidewalk when Emma pulled up. She was young. 16, maybe 17, with dark hair pulled into a low ponytail and a backpack that looked overstuffed. The kind of packed bag that suggested more than a casual trip across town. She was wearing a hoodie too light for the temperature and had the particular stillness of someone trying very hard to look like everything was fine. Emma unlocked the doors. The girl climbed in. South Boston? Emma confirmed, checking the app. Yes, please. Quiet voice. Polite. She sat with the backpack in her lap, instead of setting it beside her, holding it the way people hold things they're afraid of losing. Emma pulled back onto the street and let the silence sit for a few minutes, which was her general policy with passengers who didn't want to talk. Some people used the cab as a thinking space, and she respected that. But she kept glancing in the rearview mirror, not in a suspicious way, just the way you watch someone when something about them doesn't quite settle. The girl was staring out the window with an expression Emma recognized. She'd worn it herself at that age. It was the look of someone who had made a decision and was now living inside the consequences of it, trying to decide whether to keep going or turn back. They were crossing the bridge over the Charles River when the memory surfaced. Emma had seen that face before, not in person, but on her phone screen 3 days earlier, when a local news alert had popped up about a missing teenager from Beacon Hill. The article had included a photo, a school picture, bright smile, dark hair. Emma had scrolled past it without much thought at the time. She wasn't scrolling past it now. She kept her voice easy and her eyes on the road. Long day? The girl glanced up at the mirror. Something like that. You heading home? A pause. No. Emma nodded like that was a perfectly normal answer. Staying with someone in South Boston? Another pause, longer this time. I haven't completely figured that out yet. Which told Emma most of what she needed to know. The girl didn't have a plan. She had a destination on an app and a heavy backpack and whatever was pushing her away from wherever she'd come from. Emma had driven enough late-night passengers to understand the difference between someone going somewhere and someone just leaving. She took a slow breath. "What's your name?" The girl hesitated. "Lily," and there it was. Emma kept her expression neutral, both hands on the wheel, eyes forward. Lily Carter, Ryan's daughter. Emma's mind ran through the situation quickly and practically, the way it did when a fare went sideways and she needed to stay calm. The girl was a minor. She was alone. She had a bag that suggested she hadn't planned to go home tonight. And she had a father who, whatever else Emma thought about him, had sat across from her 3 days ago and talked about his wife with a kind of quiet devastation that didn't belong to a man who didn't care about his family. "Lily's a nice name," Emma said. "Thanks." The girl shifted the backpack in her lap. "Can we just drive for a bit? I don't actually want to go to South Boston. I just put in an address so the app would work." "Sure," Emma said. "I'll keep the meter off." That surprised Lily enough that she actually looked up at the mirror properly for the first time. Emma caught her eyes, held them for just a second, then looked back at the road. They drove in silence through the Cambridge side streets, past the lit windows of restaurants and the last of the evening foot traffic, while Emma thought about her next move carefully. "You want to tell me what's going on?" she said eventually, not pushing, just opening a door. Lily was quiet for almost a full minute. Then, slowly, she unzipped the front pocket of her backpack and pulled out a small hardcover notebook. Its cover worn soft at the corners, the kind of book that had been handled many times over many years. "I found this in the back of my mother's closet," she said. 3 weeks ago. Nobody knew it was there." She ran her thumb along the spine. "I've been reading it ever since, and I can't stop thinking about what's in it." Emma glanced at the journal in the mirror. "What's in it?" "Questions," Lily said. "My mom was asking questions about my dad's company, about money, about people she didn't trust." She pressed her lips together. "She died before she got any answers. And now I have her notebook and I don't know what to do with it, and I can't ask my dad because what if?" She stopped. "What if he's part of it?" Emma finished gently. Lily looked out the window. "Yeah." Emma let that sit for a moment. Outside, Boston moved past in its usual evening rhythm, headlights and storefronts, and people going wherever people go when the day is done. "I think," Emma said carefully, "that you need to talk to your father." "I can't. I know it feels that way." Emma slowed for a red light and turned halfway in her seat to look at Lily directly. "But running away with a journal full of questions doesn't get you answers. It just gets you cold and scared in a city at night." Lily stared at her. "You know who I am." Emma nodded once. "I do. Are you going to call him?" "I'm going to suggest you do," Emma said. "But first, I'm going to buy you something hot to drink, and you're going to sit somewhere warm. And we're going to figure out the next step together." Lily looked at her for a long moment. Something in her shoulders dropped, just slightly, like a breath she'd been holding since she left the house. "Okay," she said quietly. Emma pulled into the nearest cafe parking lot, cut the engine, and reached for her phone. The cafe Ryan suggested was on the waterfront, the kind of place that stayed open late and didn't ask questions about why 3 people who barely knew each other were sitting together over coffee, looking like they each carried something heavy. Emma had called him from the parking lot, while Lily waited inside the warm cafe. With a hot chocolate and both hands wrapped around the cup, the call lasted under 2 minutes. Emma told him where they were, told him Lily was safe, and told him to come alone and come calm. He said he'd be there in 20 minutes. He arrived in 15. Emma watched him walk through the door and saw something she hadn't expected. The composed, controlled man from Newbury Street was gone. In his place was a father, moving quickly, scanning the room, and visibly exhaling when he spotted Lily in the corner booth. He crossed the cafe in a few strides and stopped at the edge of the table, like he wasn't sure if he should sit or speak first. Lily looked up at him. "I'm not ready to apologize," she said. "I'm not here for an apology," Ryan said, and sat down across from her. Emma took the seat at the end of the table, out of the direct line between them, close enough to be present, but not in the middle of something that belonged to them. For the first few minutes, it was uncomfortable in the specific way family conversations are, when too much has gone unsaid for too long. Ryan asked if she was okay. Lily said yes. Ryan asked why she left. Lily didn't answer right away. She looked at the journal sitting on the table between them, its worn cover catching the low cafe light. Ryan's eyes dropped to it. His expression changed. "Is that your mother's?" he said. "I found it in her closet," Lily said. "Behind the winter coats, in a box I don't think anyone ever opened." She slid it a few inches toward him but didn't hand it over. "I've been reading it for 3 weeks. Ryan didn't reach for it. "What does it say?" Lily opened it to a page she'd marked with a folded receipt. She read aloud, not the whole entry, just a few lines. Her mother's handwriting was small and careful, the kind of handwriting that took its time. The entry described a meeting she'd attended with Ryan's business partners, a dinner she hadn't been meant to understand, and numbers that didn't match what she'd seen in documents at home. She wrote that she didn't want to worry Ryan without being certain. She wrote that she planned to look into it further before saying anything. She never got the chance. Ryan sat very still while Lily read. When she stopped, he didn't speak for a long moment. He was looking at the table rather than at either of them, and Emma could see the effort it took him to stay composed. "She never told me," he said finally. "I know," Lily said. "I think she was trying to protect you." "From what?" "From finding out that someone you trusted was lying to you." Ryan looked up at his daughter. Something passed between them in that look, not resolution, not yet, but the beginning of it, two people acknowledging that the ground beneath a shared grief had just shifted. Emma leaned forward slightly. "Can I see the journal?" Lily pushed it across to her. Emma turned the pages carefully, not reading every word but scanning the structure of the entries. Ryan's wife, whose name had been Claire, was methodical. She dated every entry. She noted names, amounts, and meeting locations. She didn't draw conclusions easily. She gathered information first and returned to it in later entries, adding detail, cross-referencing, the way someone would who wanted to be absolutely sure before raising an alarm. One name appeared more than once. "Michael Dawson," Emma said, reading the name from 3 separate entries. "Who is he?" Ryan's jaw tightened. "He was my business partner. We built the company together, the early years, before it grew into what it is now." He paused. "We had a falling out about 5 years ago. He left the company. I haven't spoken to him since." "Did it end badly?" Emma asked. "I thought it ended professionally," Ryan said. "I bought out his share." He signed the paperwork and left. His eyes moved back to the journal. But Claire was already writing about him 2 years before that, which meant Claire had seen something long before the professional split. Something that made her quietly uncomfortable enough to document it privately without telling her husband. Whatever she'd found, she had carried it alone, turning it over carefully in the pages of a notebook she hid in the back of a closet. Lily closed her hands around her hot chocolate. "I thought the journal meant something terrible," she said. "I thought maybe." She stopped and started again. "I was scared of what it might mean about Dad." Ryan looked at his daughter directly. "You thought I knew." "I didn't know what to think," Lily said honestly. "That's why I left." Ryan nodded slowly. He didn't get defensive, didn't push back, and Emma gave him credit for that. He just sat with what his daughter had said and let it be true. "I didn't know," he said. "Whatever Claire found, whatever was happening, I was not part of it." His voice was steady and quiet. "And I want to find out what she was looking into, whatever it costs." Lily studied his face for a long moment. Then she reached across the table and pulled the journal back toward herself. Not to shut the conversation down, but protectively, the way you handle something that matters. Then we find out together, she said. Ryan looked across the table at Emma, who had not asked to be involved and had not walked away either. You've already helped more than you know, he said. Emma looked at the journal, then at the two of them, and thought about Claire writing quietly in secret, trying to protect people she loved from something she hadn't fully understood yet. Tell me more about Michael Dawson, Emma said. The drive to Providence took just under an hour. Ryan had suggested they hire a driver, which Emma had responded to with a look that ended the conversation. She drove. Ryan sat in the passenger seat with a folder of printed documents across his knees, and Lily sat behind him with the journal open, cross-referencing names and dates against the paperwork Ryan had pulled from his company's archived files the night before. It felt strange and oddly natural at the same time, the three of them moving through the gray October morning on I-95, the city falling away behind them, Rhode Island opening up ahead. Ryan had spent the previous evening making calls. Not to lawyers, not yet, just to people who remembered the early years of the company well enough to fill in gaps. One of them, an old accountant named Frank, who'd retired to Cape Cod, had mentioned something useful. Before Michael Dawson left the company, he'd transferred a portion of his consulting work to a registered business address in Providence. Frank hadn't thought much of it at the time. People restructured when they moved on. But the address had stayed active for years after Michael's departure, quietly receiving correspondence, filing minimum paperwork, and doing just enough to avoid attracting attention. Claire had written the Providence address in the journal. She'd underlined it twice. Emma took the exit off the highway and followed Ryan's directions into the older part of the city, past brick buildings that had been repurposed 3 or 4 times over the decades, past narrow streets that still carried the layout of a much older Providence. The address led them to a narrow, commercial building, sandwiched between a print shop and a vacant storefront, its ground floor occupied by a small accounting firm with frosted glass windows. "This is it," Ryan said, looking up from the folder. "What exactly are we expecting to find here?" Lily asked from the back seat. "Records," Ryan said. "Or at least confirmation that records exist." Emma parked across the street and studied the building for a moment. "You're not planning to walk in there and start asking questions, are you?" Ryan glanced at her. "Why not?" "Because if Michael Dawson has been hiding something for years, the people in that office aren't going to hand it over to you because you asked nicely." She looked at the frosted windows. "We need to know what we're walking into before we walk into it." Ryan was quiet for a moment. "You think like someone who's been underestimated a lot." "I drive a cab in Boston," Emma said flatly. "You learn to read a situation before you commit to it." They sat and watched the building for 20 minutes. 2 people entered during that time, both carrying document folders. One woman left carrying nothing. The activity level was low but deliberate, the quiet rhythm of an office that processed things and didn't advertise. Lily leaned between the front seats. "Mom mentioned someone in here by name. A woman called Sandra Reeves. She's listed as the registered agent for the company." She found the page in the journal and held it forward. Mom wrote that Sandra had reached out to her directly. She wanted to meet. Ryan turned in his seat. "Claire never mentioned that. She never mentioned any of this to you," Lily said gently, without accusation. "She was figuring it out first." Ryan took the journal, read the entry, and handed it back. Sandra reached out to Claire, which means Sandra knew something was wrong too. Emma was already thinking ahead. If she's still working there, she might be willing to talk, especially if she tried to reach out once before and never got a response. She paused. "Lily, does the journal say when Sandra contacted your mother?" Lily checked. "About 8 months before she died." The 3 of them sat with that for a moment. Emma got out of the car first. "I'll go in alone." Both Ryan and Lily looked at her. "You walking in there," Emma said to Ryan, "is the worst possible move. If anyone in that office reports back to Michael Dawson, the moment he hears your name, he'll know exactly what's happening." She straightened her jacket. I'm nobody to them. I'm just a person with a question. Ryan didn't look happy about it. What are you going to say? I'll figure it out on the way across the street. She left before he could argue. The inside of the office was exactly what the outside suggested, plain, organized, and slightly too quiet for a working Wednesday. A receptionist looked up when Emma entered. A woman in her 30s with reading glasses pushed up on her head. Emma smiled. Hi, I'm looking for Sandra Reeves. I was told she might be able to help me with some documentation questions. I'm handling some estate paperwork, and her name came up. The receptionist's expression didn't change much, but something behind her eyes did. Can I ask who referred you? Emma kept the smile easy. Claire Carter. 3 seconds of silence. Then the receptionist picked up her phone, spoke quietly into it, and set it back down. She'll be right out. Sandra Reeves was a small woman in her 60s with sharp eyes and the careful posture of someone who had been precise about everything for a very long time. She looked at Emma without speaking for a moment, then said, Claire Carter has been gone for 4 years. I know, Emma said. Her family sent me. Sandra looked past Emma toward the frosted glass door, as if checking whether anyone had followed. Then she looked back at Emma and made a decision that Emma could see forming in real time. A person who had been waiting for exactly this moment and had almost given up on it arriving. Come to the back, Sandra said quietly, and close the door behind you. Sandra's office was small and deliberately plain. No artwork on the walls, no personal photographs on the desk, just filing cabinets. A computer that looked older than it should have been for an active business, and a single window overlooking the alley behind the building. Emma got the impression that Sandra had arranged her workspace specifically to give away nothing about herself to anyone who might walk in uninvited. Sandra closed the door, sat behind the desk, and looked at Emma the way experienced people look at strangers they're considering trusting. Measuring, steady, not hostile. How much does the family know? She asked. Enough to make the drive from Boston, Emma said. Claire's journal led them here. Her daughter found it. Something moved across Sandra's face at the mention of the journal. Relief, maybe, or the particular exhaustion of someone who has carried a seek long enough that setting it down feels more frightening than holding it. I kept copies, Sandra said. She opened the bottom drawer of the filing cabinet without hesitating, as if she'd rehearsed this moment privately many times. She placed a thick manila envelope on the desk between them. I've had these for 4 years. I didn't know who to give them to or who to trust. Michael Dawson has relationships with people I can't see around. I wasn't willing to hand this to the wrong person. Emma looked at the envelope, but didn't reach for it. What's in it? Financial records, Sandra said. Transactions that were processed through this office over a period of 7 years. They were structured to look like standard consulting fees, but the money was moving in a pattern that doesn't have an honest explanation. She folded her hands on the desk. Michael was pulling funds from Ryan Carter's company through layered invoices. Not enormous amounts at once. Small enough to pass quarterly reviews without triggering anything. But consistent and over 7 years, significant. How significant? Sandra named a figure. Emma kept her expression steady, but the number was large enough to change things. Large enough to explain why Michael had worked carefully and quietly for so long rather than taking anything obvious. Claire figured this out, Emma said. Claire was smart and she was thorough, Sandra said. She came to me because she found discrepancies in documents her husband had brought home. She didn't understand all of it, but she understood enough to be concerned. I filled in the rest. Sandra paused. I told her she needed to take it to someone official. She said she needed more time to be certain before she said anything to Ryan. She didn't want to damage his trust in Michael without being absolutely sure. And then she died, Emma said quietly. 3 months after our last conversation, Sandra said. And I had no way of knowing whether her death had anything to do with what she'd found or whether it was what they said it was, a sudden illness. I had no proof either way. So I kept the copies, and I waited. And I told myself that if anyone ever came asking, I would give them everything. Emma sat back in her chair and thought for a moment. The door was something she needed to handle carefully. Sandra had just told her that she didn't know whether Claire's death was connected to what she'd uncovered. That was a significant thing to carry back across the street to Ryan and Lily, and Emma needed to think about how to do it without breaking something fragile that had only just started to form between a father and his daughter. I need to bring Ryan Carter in, Emma said. He's outside. Sandra nodded slowly. I thought he might be. Is that a problem? It was. For a long time, Sandra said. I didn't know if he was involved. I didn't know how deep it went. She looked at the envelope on the desk. But if he's here because his daughter found Claire's journal, that tells me something. Emma went to the door. Give me 2 minutes. She crossed the street to where Ryan and Lily were standing beside the cab, no longer able to wait inside it. Ryan read her face before she said anything. You found something, he said. Someone, Emma said. And she has documentation. She looked at him steadily. Before you go in, I need you to understand that some of what she's going to tell you is going to be hard to hear. Not because of anything you did, because of what Claire was carrying alone. Ryan held her gaze. Tell me. Inside, Emma said. Come on. The three of them filed into Sandra's office, which immediately became considerably more crowded. Lily took the chair beside Emma. Ryan stood near the door for a moment, looking at Sandra. And Sandra looked back at him, with the careful expression of someone returning something that had been lost. Mr. Carter, she said, your wife was one of the most careful and decent people I've met. I want you to know that before anything else. Ryan sat down. Sandra talked for a long time. She went through the records methodically, explaining the structure of Michael's scheme in plain language, tracing the flow of money through shell invoices, and holding accounts with the patience of someone who had rehearsed the explanation in her head across many quiet evenings. Ryan listened without interrupting, which Emma had come to recognize as one of his genuine qualities. He didn't perform reactions. He absorbed things and dealt with them internally first. Lily took notes in the back of her mother's journal, which felt right in a way that was hard to articulate. When Sandra finished, the room was quiet for a while. Ryan picked up the manila envelope and held it without opening it. He looked at it the way you look at something that has simultaneously answered a question and opened 10 more. She was protecting me, he said. It wasn't a question. She was protecting everyone, Sandra said. That was Claire. Ryan set the envelope down carefully on the desk. Then he put his face in his hands for just a moment, briefly, the way a person does when they finally allow themselves to feel something they've been holding back for a very long time. Lily put her hand on his arm and left it there. Emma looked out the small window at the alley, giving them the moment, and felt something settle quietly in her chest, the particular warmth of watching people find their way back to each other. Outside, the October sky had gone pale and wide over Providence. They had a long drive back to Boston ahead of them. The trip to New York happened 10 days later. Sandra's documents had given them a foundation. But Ryan's lawyer, a careful woman named Patricia Hale, who'd handled the company's legal work for 12 years, had looked through the records and identified a gap. The invoices Sandra provided traced the money leaving Ryan's company, but the receiving end, where it ultimately landed after passing through the layered accounts, pointed to a holding company registered in New York. Until they could demonstrate where the money had gone and who had final access to it, the documentation told an incomplete story. Patricia had been direct about it. Incomplete stories didn't hold up. So Ryan booked 3 rooms at a midtown hotel. Emma packed an overnight bag that had seen better days, and Lily convinced her school that a family matter required 2 days away, which was technically true. Emma had never stayed in the kind of hotel Ryan booked. She didn't say anything about it, just set her bag down in a room that was larger than her apartment's living room and stood at the window looking out over the Manhattan skyline for a moment before getting back to the practical matter of why they were there. Ryan had a contact in the city, a forensic accountant named David Cho, who had worked financial investigations for 15 years before moving into private consulting. They met him the first morning in a conference room he rented by the hour in a midtown office building. David was compact and precise, the kind of person who spoke in complete sentences and never repeated himself, and he had already reviewed the documents Sandra had provided before they arrived. He got to the point immediately. The holding company receiving the funds is registered under a name that doesn't connect directly to Michael Dawson. On paper, David said, pulling up a document on his laptop and turning the screen toward them. But the registered agent for that company is a law firm that Michael has used personally for over a decade. And the signatory on the account is a woman named Patricia Holden. Ryan leaned forward. I know that name. Michael's sister-in-law, David said. She's listed as the director of the holding company. The company itself has no employees, no website, no business activity of any kind. It exists entirely to receive and redistribute funds. Lily looked at the screen. Redistribute to where? David clicked through to the next document. 3 places. A personal investment account in Michael Dawson's name in the Cayman Islands. A property portfolio registered under his sister-in-law's name in Florida. And a third account that took longer to trace. He paused, and the pause was deliberate. The third account has been making regular payments to a former employee of Ryan's company. Someone who left 18 months ago under what was described as a mutual agreement. Ryan sat back slowly. Who? David said the name. The silence in the room changed quality. Emma watched Ryan's face go through something complicated. Not shock exactly. Something closer to the specific pain of a suspicion you'd buried deep enough to convince yourself it wasn't real, suddenly surfacing with evidence attached. The name David had said was someone Ryan had considered a friend. Not just a colleague, a genuine friend of 15 years who had attended his wife's funeral, who had called on the anniversary of Claire's death every year without fail, who had been one of the people Ryan trusted with sensitive company information during the years Michael was quietly draining the accounts. He was feeding Michael information, Ryan said. It wasn't a question. Consistently, David confirmed. For approximately 4 years, the payments correlate directly with periods of significant financial activity in the company. Quarterly, almost without exception. Lily turned to her father. Did Mom know about him? Ryan picked up Claire's journal, which Lily had brought along, and opened it to the last few entries. He read quietly for a moment. Then he turned the journal around and pointed to a line near the bottom of the final page. Claire had written, I don't want to believe it's someone close. But the pattern keeps pointing inward, she had known. Not the name, not the proof, but the shape of it. She had felt the outline of it and hadn't been able to bring herself to write the name down. Maybe because writing it down would have made it real in a way she wasn't ready for. Ryan closed the journal carefully and set it on the table. She carried this alone, he said quietly. All of it. Emma had been listening and watching and staying out of the way, which was her role in these moments. But something about the flatness in Ryan's voice pulled her forward. She didn't carry it to protect herself, Emma said. She carried it because she loved you, and she wasn't willing to hand you a disaster without being certain first. That's not a burden she resented. That was her trying to take care of you. Ryan looked at her across the table. Something in his expression shifted, opened slightly, the way a window does when someone unlocks it from the inside after a long time. David gave them space, stepping out to take a phone call that may or may not have been real. And the 3 of them sat with the weight of what they'd just learned. After a while, Lily spoke. So Michael wasn't responsible for Mom's death. No evidence of that, Emma said carefully. What he did was financial. Serious and deliberate, but financial. That almost makes it worse in a different way, Lily said. She died carrying something that turned out to be about money, not about anything that made it worth dying for. Nobody had a good answer to that, because she was right. Ryan gathered the documents David had printed and stacked them with Sandra's records inside the folder. His movements were precise and controlled, the way people get when emotion is present. But public expression of it isn't something they're willing to do right now. He looked at Emma. "Let's go home," he said. Emma nodded, picked up her overnight bag, and followed him out into the bright, relentless noise of a New York afternoon. Patricia Hale's office occupied the 14th floor of a building on State Street, with a view of Boston Harbor that Emma kept getting distracted by. Every time she looked up from the documents, it spread across the conference table. They had been there since 8 in the morning. It was now past 2 in the afternoon, and the table looked like a filing cabinet had emptied itself across it. Stacks of records, printed bank statements, Sandra's envelope, David Cho's forensic summary, and Claire's journal sitting slightly apart from everything else, as it always did, like it belonged to a different category than the legal paperwork. Patricia had gone through everything twice. She was the kind of lawyer who didn't speak until she was certain, which meant the room had gone through long stretches of silence, broken only by the sound of pages turning and the occasional note she made in a precise, compressed handwriting that matched her general approach to everything. When she finally set her pen down, everyone at the table looked at her. "This is enough," she said. "Not comfortable, not easy, but enough." The forensic trail David established, combined with Sandra's original records, creates a documented pattern that any competent investigator will be able to follow. She looked at Ryan. "Michael Dawson systematically redirected funds from your company over 7 years using layered invoices, a shell holding company, and an internal informant who helped him time the movements to avoid detection. The total figure is significant. This is not a gray area." Ryan nodded once. "What are the options?" "You could go directly to federal investigators," Patricia said. "Given the amount involved and the interstate structure of the scheme, this falls under federal jurisdiction. That path is thorough but public, and once it starts, you have limited control over how it unfolds." She paused. "Or you approach Michael directly with the documentation and give him the opportunity to make restitution before anything is filed. That path is faster, quieter, and gives you more control over the outcome for your employees and the company's public standing." "What does the second option risk?" Emma asked. Patricia looked at her with the expression of someone mildly surprised to find a taxi driver asking the right question. "It risks Michael destroying evidence we haven't located yet. It risks him fleeing, and it requires Ryan to sit across from someone who betrayed his family and conduct a negotiation without letting that become personal." Ryan's jaw tightened slightly. "I can manage that." "I know you believe that," Patricia said evenly. "I'm telling you, it will be harder in the room than it sounds in this office." Lily had been quiet through most of the legal discussion, but she'd been doing something else while Patricia and Ryan talked. She was working through the final section of her mother's journal, the entries Emma hadn't looked at closely, because they appeared to be personal rather than investigative. Lily had been reading them with the careful attention she gave everything her mother had written, and now she looked up. "There's something here," she said. Everyone looked at her. "The last 3 entries aren't about Michael or the money," Lily said. "Mom was writing about the company's original partnership agreement. The one from before it went public." She turned the journal around so Patricia could see the page. She wrote that Ryan's original agreement with Michael contained a clause that was never formally dissolved when Michael left. Something about shared access to archived company records. Patricia took the journal and read the entry. Her expression shifted in the specific way it does when a lawyer encounters something unexpected that changes the shape of a problem. "If that clause was never formally closed," Patricia said slowly, "then Michael has had a technical basis to access archived records all along, which means he may have documents we haven't accounted for. Company records from the early years that could be used to complicate any action." Ryan takes. Or, Emma said, following the thought, it means Ryan has the same access to Michael's archived contributions to the company. Everything Michael submitted during the partnership years. Patricia looked at Emma again, this time without the mild surprise. Correct. If the clause runs both ways, and original partnership agreements typically do, then Ryan's legal team can request full access to everything Michael filed during his time with the company, including communications. She set the journal down, which would likely include correspondence that makes the scheme considerably easier to prove. Ryan looked at Lily. Your mother found the missing piece. Lily smiled, small and private. She usually did. The mood in the room changed after that, not celebratory. The situation was too serious and too layered for that, but settled. The path forward had become clearer in the last 10 minutes than it had been in the previous 3 weeks. Patricia spent the next hour drafting the formal records request, using the partnership clause Lily had found as its legal foundation. Ryan called David Cho, who confirmed that the archived communications would, if obtained, close the remaining gaps in the financial trail. Sandra, reached by phone, agreed to provide a formal witness statement when required. By the time they packed up the conference table, the strategy was in place. Ryan would approach Michael Dawson with Patricia present, the complete documentation in hand and a settlement structure already prepared. The goal was recovery, not spectacle. The company's employees had done nothing wrong and had no reason to suffer consequences for what Michael had done. The focus from the beginning had been on protecting them, and that didn't change now. Emma carried the last stack of folders to Patricia's assistant and then stood at the harbor window for a moment. Watching a ferry move slowly across the gray water, Ryan came to stand beside her. 12 days ago you were a stranger who slapped me in a parking lot, he said. Emma kept looking at the water. 14 days ago you reversed into my cab without checking your mirrors. He laughed, genuinely, the same unguarded sound she'd heard in the Newberry Street Cafe, the one that changed his face. Thank you, he said, for all of it. Emma watched the ferry reach the far dock and slow to a stop. Let's make sure it actually works first, she said. It worked. Michael Dawson, confronted with the complete documentation and the partnership clause that gave Ryan's legal team access to 7 years of archived correspondence, agreed to full restitution within 72 hours. He signed documents that protected the company's employees entirely and kept the matter out of public proceedings. The internal informant quietly resigned and signed a similar agreement. The company held. 3 weeks after Michael Dawson signed the last of the documents, Ryan called Emma on a Tuesday morning while she was between fares, parked outside a bakery in Brookline with a coffee that was actually still hot for once. There's something I'd like to show you, he said. Both of you. Saturday morning. Emma assumed he meant Lily. Where? The memorial garden near the harbor. Claire's family planted it the year after she passed. I haven't taken Lily there since she was 12. A brief pause. I think it's time. Emma said she'd be there. She spent the rest of the week thinking about what had shifted over the past month, trying to locate exactly when things had changed, the way you try to identify the moment a season actually turns. It wasn't one thing. It was the accumulation of small moments. Ryan listening without interrupting. Lily reading her mother's words aloud in a waterfront cafe with a steady voice that cost her something. Sandra opening a drawer she'd kept closed for 4 years. The look on Ryan's face in a New York conference room when the shape of Claire's love for him became fully visible. Emma had spent years driving strangers through the city, carrying their silences and their small conversations and their complicated days. She had always been good at reading people from the front seat. But somewhere between Providence and State Street, she had stopped being a witness to Ryan Carter's life and become a part of it, and she hadn't noticed it happening because it hadn't announced itself. It had just quietly become true. Saturday arrived gray and cool, the kind of November morning that smelled like wet leaves and approaching winter. Emma parked near the harbor, and found Ryan and Lily already waiting at the garden entrance, standing close together in a way they hadn't at the beginning of all this. Lily had her mother's journal tucked under one arm. Ryan had brought flowers, simple white ones, the kind Claire apparently preferred, according to something Lily had mentioned once in passing, and Ryan had clearly remembered. The memorial garden was small and well kept, tucked between the harbor path and a low stone wall, with several wooden benches and plantings that would bloom properly in spring, but held their structure quietly through winter. Claire's section was near the far bench, marked with a small engraved stone and the rose bushes her family had chosen. They stood there for a while without talking, which felt correct. Lily eventually sat on the bench beside the stone and opened the journal to the first page, not the investigative entries, the earliest ones, written years before Claire had stumbled onto anything concerning. She read a few lines quietly, her mother's voice preserved in careful handwriting, describing an ordinary Tuesday, a good meal, something funny Ryan had said that made her laugh on the drive home. Ryan stood very still while Lily read, his hands loose at his sides, his eyes on the rose bushes. When Lily stopped reading, she closed the journal and held it in her lap. "I think I want to keep reading it from the beginning," she said. "Not the investigation parts. All of it, the regular parts." "She would have wanted you to have it," Ryan said. Lily leaned her head briefly against his shoulder, just for a second, and Ryan put his arm around her, and Emma looked at the harbor because the moment belonged to them. After a while they walked, all three of them, along the harbor path that curved away from the garden toward the open water. The city sat across the water in its familiar arrangement of bridges and buildings, looking the way Boston always looked on gray mornings, solid and unhurried and entirely itself. Lily walked slightly ahead, reading something on her phone, giving them space with the particular tact of a teenager who understood more than she let on. Ryan walked beside Emma with his hands in his coat pockets. "I owe you an apology," he said. Emma glanced at him. For the car. For that morning. For being the kind of person who assumed his inconvenience outweighed everyone else's. He looked out at the water. "I've been thinking about that a lot. About how I was moving through the world before the parking lot." "Grief does strange things," Emma said. "It does," he agreed. "But I was like that before Claire died too, if I'm honest. She used to call it my armor." He paused. She wasn't wrong. Emma thought about the unfinished sentence he'd left hanging on Newbury Street 4 weeks ago. "If you ever need anything." She had carried it around since then without examining it too closely, the way you don't press on something that might mean more than you're ready. "For you're different now," she said. "You slapped it out of me," he said. Emma laughed, a real one, and it surprised her, the ease of it. Ryan smiled beside her, and for a moment the gray morning felt considerably warmer than the temperature suggested. They walked a little further. Lily had stopped ahead to watch a boat moving slowly out toward the harbor mouth, her hair lifting in the cold wind off the water. Ryan stopped walking. Emma stopped beside him. "I'd like to keep seeing you," he said. Straightforward, no performances around it. "Not because of everything that happened. Because of who you are. Because you walked into Sandra's office with nothing but a name and figured it out. Because you sat in that cafe in Providence and gave Lily and me the space to find our way back to each other. Because you're the most genuinely honest person I've met in a long time." Emma looked at him. Ryan Carter, who had reversed a luxury SUV into her cab, who had stood in a parking lot with his cheek red and his phone on the ground, and his certainty rattled for the first time in years. "I drive a cab," she said. "My transmission is making a sound I can't afford to fix, and my apartment is the size of your hotel bathroom in New York." "I know," he said simply. Emma looked back at the water, where the boat had nearly reached the harbor mouth. "Saturdays work for me," she said. "I take Sundays off." Ryan nodded, and the smile that came after it was the quietest and most genuine thing she'd seen from him, better than the laugh in the cafe, better than the composed boardroom version of him. Just a man on a harbor path on a gray November morning, standing next to someone who had once slapped him in a cemetery parking lot and changed everything. Lily appeared beside them from nowhere in the way teenagers do. She looked at Emma. She looked at her father. She looked between them with the expression of someone who had suspected this was coming and had decided she was fine with it. "Are we getting breakfast or not?" she said. "Because I've been cold for 20 minutes and nobody asked me." Ryan reached over and put his hand briefly on top of Emma's where it rested at her side. "Breakfast," he said. They walked back along the harbor path together, the city steady and familiar ahead of them, the cold wind at their backs, and the morning opening up into whatever came next.